Eventually, though, I don't fear the fact that you can destroy truth. I think it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's sort of like you can destroy the moon tomorrow.
Yeah.
So they will work at it, and they benefit by it, and it's worthwhile for them on the short term if they can lie and fib and distort and make a lot of money. But long term, they can't change it. If truth is truth, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you lie about it,
Yeah.
you still find out. But in history, you find out, sometimes a year later, 2 years later, a decade later, sometimes many years later, which is sad and frustrating. But you still, when you find it, the principle is living in a society where you're allowed to speak it and work it out, compete, have debates, and that's what was destroyed.
Yeah.
Any debate at all. When I, at the beginning, how many times I got upset about the fact, well, in medical school we had debates. They taught us that as a resident. You take this side of it and this side and do your research and see what you can do to prove one form of treatment was better than another, and that to me was one of the things that was very helpful for me to thinking about it. But now that process is illegal.
From the Epoch Times by way of Zero Hedge, Africa is starkly unvaccinated and starkly unvanquished by COVID. It's a real head scratcher.
Morality. Whoever you are, you who are hearing me now, I am speaking to whatever living remnant is left uncorrupted within you, to the remnant of the human, to your mind, and I say, there is a morality of reason, a morality proper to man, and man's life is its standard of value.
Time and again, this unlikely group held press conferences, introduced various legislative tools, and communicated behind the scenes to try and grow the movement against the Iraq War. Unfortunately, with the 2008 election of Barack Obama, who ran as an anti-war candidate, but then launched numerous military attacks abroad, that old coalition fell apart. Some progressives excused Obama's militarism and lost interest in cooperating with conservatives. Some conservatives were driven by their personal dislike of Obama and lost sight of the target. Suddenly, as we face the once unimaginable prospect of a direct military conflict with nuclear-armed Russia over Ukraine, many of us have watched with alarm as the Biden administration, with the enthusiastic backing of many congressional Republicans, has continuously escalated involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and now sits dangerously close to a direct hot war with the largest nuclear superpower on Earth. How did we get here? Where are the same voices and cooler heads? Just when it seemed they were nowhere to be found, here we are. I hope as many people as possible will join us and continue to come together for this important cause. We must join together while we still can. No war with Russia.
All that which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good. All that which destroys it is the evil.
The demand coming from the U.S. government trying to replenish the 600 million barrels that it dumped on the market in an effort to suppress the price of oil. Now, I'm sure the government is going to lose on this trade. They are not going to end up making a profit. They're not going to buy the oil back cheaper than what they sold it at. They're going to end up paying much higher prices for the oil that they buy than they receive for the oil that they sold. And I think the same thing is going to happen on balance to American consumers. They're going to end up paying more for oil because of what Biden did. Now, a lot of that was motivated by desire to get the price down for the midterm elections, which he succeeded in doing. And in fact, maybe had the Biden administration not sold any oil, maybe the Republicans would have got the Senate as well as the House. We never know, but clearly it helped. But in the long run, it's going to hurt. But Biden obviously didn't care about that. The longest run he could see is the next elections. And now he's looking at his own potential reelection, and he's looking at oil prices going up, and he's trying to do something to stop it. But if he continues to do this, by the end of his term, we will be out of strategic reserves, and this game will be over. And I think the OPEC nations know that. I think they're happy to see America get rid of all its strategic reserves, because that puts us in a much more vulnerable position than we otherwise would have been had we still had those reserves.
Man's life, as required by his nature, is not the life of a mindless brute, of a looting thug or a mooching mystic, but the life of a thinking being. Not life by means of force or fraud, but life by means of achievement. Not survival at any price, since there's only one price that pays for man's survival: reason.
Way back, even really further than 2008, but that's where it really started in earnest after the financial crisis, or early 2009, when the Fed first adopted a 0% interest rate policy and quantitative easing. So the Fed has been filling the pipeline with inflation for well over a decade. And now we're just really seeing the consequences. They've been there all along. It was just harder to spot them because they were hiding beneath a rigged CPI. So consumer prices were in fact rising faster than 2%. We were just not getting accurate numbers from the government. But also a lot of that inflation was hiding in plain sight in assets, in stock prices, in real estate prices, in bond prices, in the price of cryptocurrencies, and all sorts of other collectibles. It's just that nobody cared when they thought inflation was making them richer. They didn't start caring until it was making them poorer. But this problem is a long time in the making, and it's not going to be solved with a year of rate hikes, especially when those rate hikes have yet to deliver any type of meaningful change in consumption and saving patterns among the people or the government. People are still spending all of their paychecks and then some. The savings have been depleted, credit card debt is record high, and what about the government? We just passed the budget-busting continuous resolution on spending. That is an inflationary policy basically by design. And though the Federal Reserve has tightened policy, it still hasn't moved the Fed funds rate above the inflation rate. So by raising interest rates, the Fed can bring about less demand and more supply. Those are the forces that are going to bring prices down. But the Fed has not achieved that because it has not raised interest rates nearly enough for policy to be restricted. Now, everybody keeps saying, oh, no, we need to throw people out of work, right? That is the second camp, the camp that thinks that the Fed is not going to succeed in its inflation fight because it hasn't succeeded in creating enough unemployment. They're looking for higher unemployment to reduce demand. But that's not the way to reduce demand. You don't want to put people out of work. They need to be productively employed and producing goods and services. What we want them to do is not stop working, but stop spending. Now, clearly, they're not going to stop spending completely, but they have to cut back on their spending significantly so that they can increase their savings. And let's say that 100% of the people who were employed decide to cut back on their spending by 10%. They haven't cut back on their earning or their work. They're just spending 10% less of their income. Well, isn't that the same thing? Is 10% people losing their jobs completely? In fact, it's obviously much better than that because everybody is still working. But when people lose their jobs, they don't stop spending completely. They're still spending something, and they're spending unemployment benefits, they're spending food stamps, and they're spending down their savings, right? Savings are going down as unemployment goes up, and so that's being spent. And so it's an even smaller impact than the impact that we would have if people just remained employed but reduced their spending. But they are not doing that. They are spending everything they can. Why? Because the credit is still there.
Man's life is the standard of morality, but your own life is its purpose. If existence on earth is your goal, you must choose your actions and values by the standard of that which is proper to man, for the purpose of preserving, fulfilling, and enjoying the irreplaceable value which is your life.
Like, we're all slaves to this totalitarian organization. But just because it's not called the USSR IRS, it's called the IRS. What? That's cool? It's like, this is the most insane thing ever in a supposed capitalist society that we allow this. It's so goddamn insane that the IRS knows what you owe them, but won't tell you what you owe them. They go, you tell us. And if you get it wrong, you are fucked. Like, that's actually the way the system works. And so it's like, what you have, the goal always is to get people to think of it in a whole different way. That this is nothing other than the government just robbing from you. It's just an extortion racket and nothing else. So once you get people to look at it like that, then you're not really debating over like whether the rate should be 10% or 12%, or whether it should be a flat tax or a progressive tax or any of this. You're just getting people to realize that you're like, oh, I see. It's like, okay, taxation is theft. And so as much as we can reduce that, that's better. And it should all just be abolished. Like, that's like the whole game, is getting people to realize like a whole different way of looking at it.
Since life requires a specific course of action, any other course will destroy it. A being who does not hold his own life as the motive and goal of his actions is acting on the motive and standard of death. Such a being is a metaphysical monstrosity, struggling to oppose, negate, and contradict the fact of his own existence, running blindly amuck on a trail of destruction, capable of nothing but pain.
You know, Judge, a friend of mine emailed me and said, you know, Gerald, I hope a lot of people turn out, but, you know, people don't listen. And I wrote back to him. I said, you're right. People don't listen. I said, but how about the people that do listen? What are they doing? What are the people that are listening? What are they doing? What are the people that know what's going on? What are they doing? That to me is the important thing. Just don't tell me you know about what's going on and you're not doing anything. The people that don't listen, forget about them. That's not, why waste your time with that? But how about the people that are listening? How did the Berlin Wall come down? People came, they didn't leave. People came and they didn't leave. People came, they didn't leave. You don't go and then go home. And now there's something else very important, and it's one of our top trends for 2023. Middle East meltdown. And it's melting down. What's going on in Israel right now, talking about people taking to the streets, this past week, over 100,000 people took to the streets in Jerusalem. 41% of the Israelis are opposed to the judicial reform in the extreme right-wing government under Netanyahu. We've put links on there from people, Jewish people in the United States, talking about this as well. There's basically a civil war going on.
Yes.
People know that if this continues, it's hell in Israel. So going back to what I say, when all else fails, they take you to war. I'm saying Netanyahu is going to get the people's minds off the troubles that they're in right now. And there's going to be a conflict against Israel and Iran. And if this breaks out, if there's military conflict between Israel and Iran, you're going to see oil prices skyrocket to above $130 a barrel.
Wow.
That's going to crash the global economy, crash the equity markets, and escalate World War III. It's already going on with Ukraine, and now we'll move it into the Middle East.
Can I just for a second explain what Netanyahu is trying to do?
Yes, please.
So the Israeli parliament is called the Knesset, and Netanyahu's coalition has 64 of 120 votes. So the vote is a unit. It's not like the American Congress, where some Republicans vote with Democrats and vice versa. Netanyahu's coalition has offered legislation that would allow the Knesset to overrule the Supreme Court. I mean, could you imagine that here? That would eviscerate the concept of an independent judiciary. It would eviscerate the concept of civil liberties. And it would also assure that Bibi himself, who's on trial for corruption cannot be convicted. And the Jewish people, the public, sees right through it. And Benny Gantz, a former Minister of Defense and chief of the Israeli Defense Forces, a 4-star Israeli general, embraced by both the liberals and the traditionalists in Jewish politics, has said, we are, just what you said, Gerald, we are on the verge of civil war.
Yeah. And so again, you have to put the trends together on this and bring it all together. If this continues, and the United States government is totally supporting them, and also they're stealing more Palestinian land, and a thing called settlements. Settlements, you're stealing the land. You're illegally occupying since the 1967 war. It's against, you're breaking international law.
Correct.
It's against the Geneva Conventions.
I mean, this would be like us doing it, north of North Dakota, just taking over a portion of Canada and extending North Dakota north. It would be the moral equivalent of that. In fact, it's even worse because we're friendlier with the Canadians than the Jewish people are with the Palestinians.
And they're stealing, $3.8 billion of our money every year to give it to Israel for their military. Brought to you by the Nobel Peace of Crap Prize winner, Barack Obama. What I'm saying is, when we talked before about the Ukraine war, and now we have to look what's going on in the Middle East. This is really serious. So people, everybody listening, please do what you can to support peace. United we stand, divided we fall. Divided we die. Because these are evil, demonic people that are running and ruining our lives in a country near you. It's not only the United States.
Secretary General Stoltenberg of NATO, in a very candid moment 2 days ago, said, you are using, Ukraine, many times more the ammunition than we're able to supply you. Not twice as much, not 3 times as much, but many times more. What does that mean? That means that they'll soon run out of it, and we'll soon run out of it. And the only ones that will benefit are the defense industries, who will be working 24/7 to produce it, and we can't produce it fast enough. They are shoveling against the tide in fighting the Russian army. And according to McGregor, there are between 300,000 and 500,000 Russian veterans, reservists, conscripts amassing at the Russian border, ready to move into Ukraine and go as far east as they need to. And they will simply overwhelm the Ukraine army and even their American instructors that are there with them.
Happiness is the successful state of life. Pain is an agent of death. Happiness is that state of consciousness which proceeds from the achievement of one's values. A morality that dares to tell you to find happiness in the renunciation of your happiness, to value the failure of your values, is an insolent negation of morality. A doctrine that gives you as an ideal the role of a sacrificial animal seeking slaughter on the altars of others is giving you death as your standard.
Today. Oh, wow, it fell 3rd month in a row. Consumer prices in UK were 10.1% higher than a year earlier, a slower rate of inflation than 10.5 recorded in December. What the fuck are you telling me? It's down 0.4%. It's over 10%. And you look at this little chart over here, it's a spike up. This is deadly, what it's doing to people. Remember, they created, 521,000 jobs in January? And you know what that is.
Bullshit.
Philadelphia Fed manufacturing gauge plunges unexpectedly. Unexpectedly by who? Who is unexpected? Oh, the shitheads that we only talk to that are a member of the club. Manufacturing activity in Mid-Atlantic region dropped off sharply. You got to read the whole paragraph till you get to the number. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve monthly manufacturing index plunged to, quote, minus 24.3 this month from a minus 8.9 in January. It's going down. United States is on track to add nearly $19 trillion to its national debt over the next decade, $3 trillion more than previously forecast. Congress nonpartisan budget scorekeeper now projects that U.S. economy will barely grow this year. Wait a minute, they said it's going to grow. No, because they're saying the truth over here. Not when you add in inflation. So it's dragflation. The economy's going down as interest rates go up. Now, what else do we have here?
By the grace of reality and the nature of life, man, every man, is an end in himself. He exists for his own sake, and the achievement of his own happiness is his highest moral purpose. But neither life nor happiness can be achieved by the pursuit of irrational whims. Just as man is free to attempt to survive in any random manner, but will perish unless he lives as his nature requires, so he is free to seek his happiness in any mindless fraud. But the torture of frustration is all he will find, unless he seeks the happiness proper to man.
Animals are reportedly dying after toxic train wreck. This is in Palestine, Ohio. What does it mean for humans? Who the fuck you talking to? What does it mean for humans? It's killing animals. It's killing living beings. What else we got here? Ukraine conflict will likely have no military winner. Oh, you know who says that? Top U.S. general. Top U.S. general. That guy Miley? What top U.S. general? You haven't won a war. What are you talking about, top? But there's the propaganda they're selling. It will be almost impossible for Russians to achieve their political objective by military means. It is unlikely that Russia is going to overrun Ukraine. It's just not going to happen. How much you want to bet? How much you want to bet? Anybody want to bet that Russia wins? Totally opposed to the war, as I mentioned dozens of times. Totally understand why it happened. We wrote about it as the United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014. Article by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. But this is the propaganda that they're selling. Moscow's military capabilities are in question after failed Battle of Ukraine City. That's the headline from the toilet paper record, the New York Times. All they keep doing week after week, day after day, is talking about Russia's failures. They're not failing. They control over 20% of the country. Sirens are going off all over Ukraine. Could you imagine every day in your life, sirens going off in hiding? Depending on whose numbers you look at, up to 70% of their infrastructure, water, and power has been destroyed, the Ukrainians, and they have Russia's losing. This is not journalism. The Trends Journal is. A disastrous Russian assault on Vuhledar, Vuhledar, I never heard of it, viewed as an opening move in expected spring offensive. What expected spring offensive? It's fucking February. They did this in January. And when you go back, mealy mouthed over there and the rest said there wasn't going to be any movement and that Russia was going to hold fast during the winter. But this is the propaganda they keep putting out. Has renewed doubts about Moscow's ability to sustain a large-scale ground assault. Oh, yeah, who says so? As Moscow steps up its offensive in eastern Ukraine, weeks of failed attacks on a Ukraine stronghold have left 2 Russian brigades in tatters. raised questions about Russia's military tactics, and renewed doubts about its ability to maintain sustained large-scale ground assaults. Says who? Viewed by who? They don't say. That's total propaganda. Then you read all the way down, and another arrogant guy, Britain's Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, told BBC that, quote, 97% of Russia's army in Ukraine, that 97% of the Russian army is in Ukraine. How does he know this? And this is who they quote. But as has happened in previous Russian offenses, including one in November, quote, the enemy suffered critical losses. Who said this? Oh, a spokesman for the Ukrainian military forces. This is not journalism. This is pure fucking bullshit. And Hirsch said that sonar that was used to detonate the bombs attacked by the pipelines, you know what company made them? You guessed it. The company that our Secretary of Defense sat on the board of directors, Raytheon. So, okay, what else do we have? Chinese President Xi welcomes his Iranian counterpart. First visit in 20 years. So now you have China, Iran, and Russia allying. So who's going to win a war between China, Russia, and Iran first? NATO, Israel, and the United States. Place your bets. You know what my bet is? The end of life on Earth. Half of Americans in a recent survey indicated they believe national news organizations intend to mislead, misinform, or persuade the public to adopt a particular point of view through their reporting. Oh, this is a Gallup poll at the Knight Foundation. Oh, wait a minute. 50% of the people say mislead with misinformation. Oh, you mean misinformation? It's okay for them to put out misinformation. They're not banned on Google. The government doesn't go after them because it's the misinformation that they want to keep publishing. And that's why you subscribe to the Trends Journal. We don't do that. We have no advertisers. We're beholden to no one. Only you. And mostly our heart. That's number one. Our heart and soul. They're not. They're soulless. You ready? Asked whether they agreed with the statement that national news organizations do not intend to mislead, 50% said they disagreed. Only 25 agreed. Yeah, 25, that's stupid. Quote, Americans don't seem to think that national news organizations care about overall impact of their reporting on society, said John Sands, Knight's senior director for media and democracy. Knight and Gallup found Democrats trust news more than Republicans. Over the past 5 years, the level of distrust has particularly spiked among independents. Duh. Can't figure it out. Independents, people that think for themselves, aren't stupid little shitheads that put themselves in a political box of crap. Who's your favorite political box of crap shit? Lindsey Graham? Blumenthal? Adam shit? No, I like Chucky Schumer. No. I like Nancy Pelosi. Mitch McConnell. Now there's a brilliant looking piece of shit that I look up to. Independence, independent thinking. And that's why I keep saying we need a new third party. Yep. Independents. Overall, 55% of the respondents said there was a great deal of political bias coverage. There you got it. So that's why you subscribe to the Trends Journal.
The purpose of morality is to teach you not to suffer and die, but to enjoy yourself and live.
But I'm more interested right now is preventing the problem rather than waiting until it gets so bad. But we have a condition which is going to get worse, and it will be an opportunity for us to offer the principles of liberty. But it's much easier if we could just prevent the war, and that's why right now we've joined others who are trying to prevent that war from expanding in Ukraine, because people now are whispering, you know what, this is going to lead to World War III. Well, it shouldn't. It doesn't have to be, and that is why we have to say, well, we should be in the prevention business as well as the treatment business. Chris.
Excellent, Dr. Paul. I'll finish up. Anybody that listens or watches us regularly, there's a pattern to our shows. Because the government operates the same exact way, they just keep repeating the same thing over and over. They appeal to people's emotions, their superficial emotions, and then they capitalize on it. They do not want anybody to think things through. Our job is to help, for us to think things through, and then to help others to think things through, which is what the government does not want. If you think about the wars, Iraq, they spent $6 trillion for what? There were no weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and now that $6 trillion is gone, our money. Afghanistan, 20 years. COVID, over this virus, they totally overreacted, locked everybody down, and now, it was the wrong thing to do. The vaccines, they emotionally charge at everyone, and then, it doesn't prevent transmission or stop you from getting it. And then the China balloon, everybody's ready to go to war with China, and we're finding out, it's not really from China. Ukraine, $100 billion. It's the same thing. They appeal to your emotions, and then they capitalize on it real fast, and they get rich. And we all suffer as a result, or not all, but most people. And they will censor people that try to help people to think things through. And it's our job individually to do our best not to fall for these emotional tricks that it's like a hamster wheel. They just keep doing it over and over and over, and they keep capitalizing. Living wages are the same thing. They're trying to appeal to emotion. Who doesn't want free money? Just like with the COVID. They appeal to that emotion, and then it just creates, the inflation that we have. And if we have living wages, we'll get even worse inflation. So we have to think things through, because eventually the hamster wheel is going to stop. They're going to be bankrupt. And you want to at least, take care of yourself and your family the best that you can.
Very, very good, Chris. The one thing is we argue as if the enemy doesn't know what's going on. And they say, well, we just have to adjust the wages. And of course, they're now advertising a living wage. And I'd like to give my opinion. It's not going to work. It'll just make things worse. But the other thing is the enemy, those who believe, other than we who believe in the free market, they know wages have to go down. And they wanted to, but they also know that you can't regulate wages going down. People will get upset about that. So they say, what we have to do, and they even did this before the crunch came a couple of years ago, is they wanted to be prepared for this. We're getting too much debt, so let's start liquidating debt. So that what we need is there's not enough inflation. Prices aren't going up enough. So they want the inflation to lower wages, but they would never say, our policies are designed to, in a sneaky way, lower the wages of the people, and they can get away with that where they couldn't get away with it if they say, well, all right, we have a maximum wage. We can say the minimum wage is $15 an hour, even if you're only generating $12 worth an hour. So no, we'll do that. We like that, but...
Sweep aside those parasites of subsidized classrooms who live on the profits of the mind of others and proclaim that man needs no morality, no values, no code of behavior. They, who pose as scientists and claim that man is only an animal, do not grant him inclusion in the law of existence they have granted to the lowest of insects. They recognize that every living species has a way of survival demanded by its nature. They do not claim that a fish can live out of water or that a dog can live without its sense of smell. But man, they claim, the most complex of beings, man can survive in any way whatever. Man has no identity, no nature, and there's no practical reason why he cannot live with his means of survival destroyed, with his mind throttled and placed at the disposal of any orders they might care to issue.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, February 20th, 2023. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Sometimes I agree with her, sometimes I don't. Sometimes she's a little much, sometimes she's great. Came out with a very interesting statement earlier today, arguing that states should be able to secede from the Union. I've been making this argument since I first studied the Constitution and constitutional history back as an undergraduate, even before I went to law school. Let me read to you in a full screen exactly what she said, and then I'll analyze it for you. Here she is. We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this, from the sick and disgusting woke culture issues shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitorous America Last policies. We are done. Okay, Democrats are not traitors. They can offer whatever legislation they want. That's an extreme statement, but I understand hyperbole. However, on the idea of seceding from the Union, this was obviously intended by Madison when he wrote the Constitution and intended by Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. How did America come about? When the 13 colonies seceded from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence itself makes out an argument that when the central government no longer represents the best interests of one of the geographic areas over which it has dominance, and when the central government is crushing the liberties of people who live in that geographic area, it is the right and the duty of that geographic area to elect a government that will withdraw from the central government. In other words, secede. So the first act of secession actually was argued in 1798. What happened then? That's when the Congress, the Federalist Congress, the big government Congress under the Federalist big government President John Adams, the second president of the United States. Jefferson was his vice president because in those days, everybody ran for president. Whoever finished first became president. Whoever finished second became vice president. They didn't even speak for the 4 years they were in office because they disagreed on everything. The Federalist Congress enacted and John Adams signed into law the Alien and Sedition Acts. Those abominable laws permitted prosecutions for people who criticized the government. And indeed, people were prosecuted for criticizing the government and were put in jail, including famously Congressman Matthew Lyons, a sitting member of Congress, who mocked the president's waistline and thereby criticized him outside the halls of Congress, was not protected by the speech and debate clause, was incarcerated, and eventually, when Jefferson became president, was pardoned. Back to 1798. Jefferson was vice president. Madison was a member of Congress from Virginia. Madison had authored the Constitution and had authored the Bill of Rights. When the Alien and Sedition Acts were written, the legislatures of Virginia and Kentucky enacted legislation nullifying the Alien and Sedition Acts in those states and threatening to secede from the Union. Who secretly wrote those resolutions? The Virginia, secretly written by James Madison. The Kentucky, secretly written by Thomas Jefferson. It is clear that the author of the Declaration of Independence and the author of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, understood those documents to reflect a natural, inherent right to leave the government. If you're a libertarian, if you're a small government person like I am, then you believe that one of your natural rights is the right to leave. And you can leave with your neighbors, and you can leave with the geographic and political subdivision in which you live, village, town, county, region, or state. When the southern states seceded from the Union, they believed they had an absolute constitutional right to do so. That they were defending slavery was reprehensible. Nothing worse in our history has happened than the purported ownership of human beings as property. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about states which have voluntarily joined the Union by a simple act of legislation, voluntarily leaving. They have that inherent right. Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene on this issue is 100% correct. I don't expect this to go anywhere, but I would love to see it do so. Supreme Court has never ruled on this. There's an opinion called Texas versus the United States, in which the Chief Justice gave what's called dicta. That's just his own opinion, not relevant to the resolution of the case, that no state can leave without the consent of 3/4 of the others. But that's hogwash. That's just made up out of thin air. There's no statute, there's no principle, there's no law, there's no constitutional doctrine that stands for that. If the authors of the founding documents understood that those who detested what central government did and recognized its destruction of human liberty can leave, that's good enough for Congresswoman Taylor, and it's good enough for me. We'll see where this goes.
Sweep aside those hatred-eaten mystics who pose as friends of humanity and preach that the highest virtue man can practice is to hold his own life as of no value. Do they tell you that the purpose of morality is to curb man's instinct of self-preservation? It is for the purpose of self-preservation that man needs a code of morality. The only man who desires to be moral is the man who desires to live. No, you do not have to live. It is your basic act of choice. But if you choose to live, you must live as a man, by the work and the judgment of your mind. No, you do not have to live as a man. It is an act of moral choice. But you cannot live as anything else. And the alternative is that state of living death which you now see within you and around you, the state of a thing unfit for existence, no longer human and less than animal, a thing that knows nothing but pain and drags itself through its span of years in the agony of unthinking self-destruction. No, you do not have to think. It is an act of moral choice. But someone had to think to keep you alive. If you choose to default, you default on existence, and you pass the deficit to some moral man, expecting him to sacrifice his good for the sake of letting you survive by your evil. No, you do not have to be a man. But today those who are not there any longer.
Mentioned, America's first Iraq War, launched to restore the Kuwaiti monarchy in 1991, led directly to the dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran from military bases in Saudi Arabia and al-Qaeda's war against the United States. Since 2001, after failing to deploy enough reinforcements to capture or kill bin Laden at Tora Bora or allow the Delta Force to pursue him into Pakistan, the Bush administration instead sought regime change against the Taliban in Kabul, who Bill Clinton had supported just a few years before in their own regime change against the Mujahideen warlords whom Presidents Carter and Reagan had supported against the communists in the 1980s. This led to 20 years of war, including a massive so-called surge escalation halfway through for absolutely nothing, and leading to the Taliban walking right back into power as the U.S. withdrew in the summer of 2021. Saddam Hussein in Iraq War II. When David Wormser wrote his clean break plan for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's first government in 1996, he acknowledged that targeting secularist dictators, Hussein and Assad, for regime change in Iraq and Syria could further fan the flames of Islamist anti-American terrorism. But he said the solution to that problem would just have to wait until the war against them was over. Maybe in 1996, this was somehow understandable, from a Hawks perspective at least. According to Richard Schultz in the Weekly Standard, in the 1990s, the Pentagon Joint Staff would repeat as cliche that, quote, terrorism is a small price to pay for being a superpower. But after the African embassy bombings of 1998, the USS Cole attack in 2000, and September 11th, which killed nearly 3,000 people in New York and at the Pentagon, it was less understandable. Yet the neoconservatives, led by Mr. Crystal, persisted. The neocons' best laid plans to empower Jordan and compliant Shiites to take over Iraq failed. The American invasion of 2003 empowered Iran's favored factions among the Shiites, the Supreme Islamic Council and Dawa Party. In fact, it was King Abdullah of Jordan who coined the phrase Shiite crescent to describe Iran's newly enhanced power just after the invasion. Clean break, nothing. This American Shiite alliance pushed their Sunni Arab enemies out of Baghdad and into the arms of al-Qaeda in Iraq, which did not even exist before the war, adding thousands of hardened fighters to Osama bin Laden's movement, including thousands of foreign fighters who traveled there to fight against the U.S. Shiite alliance. Many of these men later went home to Libya, Syria, and Yemen to get ready for the next wars there. The U.S. took their side in all three. In Libya, the Hawks said they had to intervene to overthrow secular dictator Gaddafi to protect the poor civilians. But at the very least, tens of thousands of people have been killed in endless fighting in that country in the decades since. Bin Ladenite groups, veterans of the Second Iraq War, led that revolt and have thrived in the meantime as civil war has raged for years. Some warlords brought back literal chattel slavery of sub-Saharan Africans. Thousands of refugees drown in the Mediterranean. The war spread from Libya into Mali, Chad, Niger, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria. Obama's and allied support for the bin Ladenite revolt against the secular government in Syria, an attempt to weaken their ally Iran after the Iraq War had done so much to empower them, led to the rise of the Islamic State's so-called caliphate in eastern Syria and western Iraq, and then the third Iraq War from 2014 to 2018 to then destroy it. On behalf of those same Iranian-backed Shiite groups, the Hawks wish they hadn't fought the second Iraq War. No, the U.S. should not back these dictators, like so-called President Sisi in Egypt. That's part of what got us attacked in the first place. But we sure as hell should not be supporting bin Ladenite insurgencies against them either. Hillary Clinton and Saudi Arabia's installation of Mansour Hadi when they co-opted the Arab Spring revolt in Yemen in 2011 and 12 led straight to the next phase of the war, which broke out in 2015. For the last 6.5 years, the U.S. has backed Saudi Arabia and UAE in a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and also strengthened al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula beyond belief. There are now something like 30,000 bin Ladenite fighters in the world, and Iran and Russia, who intervened to save Assad from al-Qaeda and ISIS, are more influential in the region than ever. This is not how it was supposed to be. Speaking of Russia, it isn't just the Mideast wars. In Georgia, the U.S. supported the Rose Revolution of 2003 and the installation of Mikhail Saakashvili, who almost got us into a war with Russia when he attacked their peacekeeping forces in South Ossetia just 5 years later.
I have removed your means of survival, your victims. If you wish to know how I have done it and what I told them to make them quit, you are hearing it now. I told them, in essence, the statement I am making tonight. They were men who had lived by my code, but had not known how great a virtue it represented. I made them see it. I brought them not a re-evaluation, but only an identification of their values. We, the men of the mind, are now on strike against you in the name of a single axiom, which is the root of our moral code, just as the root of yours is the wish to escape it. The axiom that existence exists.
This is not how it was supposed to be. Speaking of Russia, it isn't just the Mideast wars. In Georgia, the U.S. supported the Rose Revolution of 2003 and the installation of Mikhail Saakashvili, who almost got us into a war with Russia when he attacked their peacekeeping forces in South Ossetia just 5 years later, and Vice President Cheney urged George Bush to strike Russian forces coming across the Caucasus Mountains. The U.S. also helped to overthrow the government of Ukraine twice, in 2004 and 2014. In 2014, they used actual Nazis in a street putsch against the elected government. It was supposed to be easy to get away with while Putin was distracted with the Sochi Olympics. But instead, the new Ukraine coup junta lost Crimea to Russia and started a brutal war in the east, which has killed more than 10,000 people and unnecessarily ratcheted up tensions with the other most powerful nuclear weapons state on the planet. Then National Endowment for Democracy head Carl Gershman even threatened regime change in Moscow itself in the Washington Post in October 2013. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton famously blessed the Honduran coup of 2009, leading directly to the rise of murderous drug cartels in that country and a massive child refugee crisis at our southern border. The American establishment had its so-called unipolar moment at the high water mark of U.S. influence to lead the world into the brave new future at the turn of the millennium, and they blew it. The U.S. government has spread not liberty, but the tyranny of the majority. Not free markets, but corrupt crony contracting. Not peace and security, but mass sectarian violence and destabilization. This has led to increased support for left and right-wing socialism around the world in reaction. Liberalism and democracy, in the broadest sense, have been discredited as meaning nothing more than supplication to American demands.
Existence exists, and the act of grasping that statement implies two corollary axioms: that something exists which one perceives, and that one exists possessing consciousness, consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists. If nothing exists, there can be no consciousness. A consciousness with nothing to be conscious of is a contradiction in terms. A consciousness conscious of nothing but itself is a contradiction in terms. Before it could identify itself as consciousness, it had to be conscious of something. If that which you claim to perceive does not exist, what you possess is not consciousness. Whatever the degree of your knowledge, these two, existence and consciousness, are axioms you cannot escape. These two are the irreducible primaries implied in any action you undertake, in any part of your knowledge, and in its sum, from the first ray of light you perceive at the start of your life to the widest erudition you might acquire at its end. Whether you know the shape of a pebble or the structure of a solar system, the axioms remain the same: that it exists and that you know it.
A few things here in no particular order, but first of all, the Second World War obviously hangs over all of this. America defeated the Nazis and the Japanese, and then created this post-war order that Mr. Crystal's referring to here. But the thing of that is, as you guys all know, oh, I'm sorry. As I think everybody knows, as even Winston Churchill himself said, it was Theodore Roosevelt and especially Woodrow Wilson's intervention in World War I that caused World War II. World War I was ending as a stalemate before America got involved and tilted the powers so far in favor of the Allies and against the Central Powers that, first of all, they prolonged the war long enough for Lenin and Trotsky, no offense, to seize power in Russia and create the Soviet Union, and They empowered the British and the French to inflict the Versailles Treaty on the Germans, which stripped them of all of their territories and demanded all these reparations that destroyed the economy and led to the rise of the Nazi power, the Nazi Party, on the promise of getting revenge for what had been done to the Germans at the end of World War I. If America had just stayed out, there would have been no Soviet Union and no Nazi Germany to fight World War II at all. Okay? As far as what happened in Ukraine in 2014, America sponsored real Nazis, not just neo-Nazis, but the proud grandsons of the Galatian SS who had perpetrated the Holocaust in Ukraine against Jews and Poles there. The right sector, the Svoboda Party, formerly called the Social Nationalist Party, and the Azov Battalion, all of whom proudly fly swastikas and commit crimes against minorities in Ukraine. And it was Ukraine that attacked the East. Once they overthrew the government, the Donbass region in the east of the country, Donetsk and Luhansk, they decided, well, if you guys are going to overthrow the government we elected in a free and fair election in 2010, then we're just going to occupy all the government buildings and refuse to recognize the new government. Then the Kiev regime attacked them. They called it the War on Terrorism. And they invaded the eastern part of their own country. And yes, it's true that the Russians did send special operations forces across the border to help them, but they never did invade the country at all with regular infantry. And when in 2000 and I think late 14 or early 2015, the people of the Donbass region voted in a plebiscite to join the Russian Federation, Putin told them no. He had no interest in absorbing their territory whatsoever. He would only provide them enough help that they needed to keep the Kiev regime out. And that was it.
To exist is to be something, as distinguished from the nothing of non-existence. It is to be an entity of a specific nature made of specific attributes. Centuries ago, the man who was, no matter what his errors, the greatest of your philosophers, has stated the formula defining the concept of existence and the rule of all knowledge. A is A. A thing is itself. You have never grasped the meaning of his statement. I am here to complete it. Existence is identity. Consciousness is identification. Whatever you choose to consider, be it an object, an attribute, or an action, the law of identity remains the same. A leaf cannot be a stone at the same time. It cannot be all red and all green at the same time. It cannot freeze and burn at the same time. A is A. Or if you wish it stated in simpler language, you cannot have your cake and eat it too.
In Australia, and they are under an absolutely authoritarian lockdown system right now, but they still have regular elections, and at least for now, I guess we'll see. But I am predicting the resounding defeat of everybody in charge of that country now after they have pushed things so far. But one more thing too, if Americans, individual citizens, want to go overseas and participate in somebody else's conflict, like the Spanish Civil War, or you want to go and help liberate the people, the Iraqis enslaved under the Dawa Party now, then you're free to go and do that. Just leave me out of it. Thank you.
Are you seeking to know what is wrong with the world? All the disasters that have wrecked your world came from your leaders' attempt to evade the fact that A is A. All the secret evil you dread to face within you and all the pain you have ever endured came from your own attempt to evade the fact that A is A. The purpose of those who taught you to evade it was to make you forget that man is man.
I'm going to give a quick thumbnail sketch of Austrian economics that's going to last less than a minute, I hope, which is that this, unlike all the other schools, the Keynesians, the monetarists, and monetarists are nothing more than mathematically enabled Keynesians, and the Marxists and all the rest, all of those are what I refer to as government supremacist schools of economics and thinking, in which they think that the collective is the ultimate arbiter of how to rationally and morally allocate resources. The Austrian school thinks that the ultimate arbiter and rational allocator and moral allocator from both a consequential and a moral perspective is the individual. And it is an economic school that examines how societies work, not how they should work. It just so happens consequentially that because they tend to be free marketeers, that kind of liberation from government coercion, in my mind, makes them better and more moral people.
Yeah. Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free.
Man cannot survive except by gaining knowledge, and reason is his only means to gain it. Reason is the faculty that perceives, identifies, and integrates the material provided by his senses. The task of his senses is to give him the evidence of existence, but the task of identifying it belongs to his reason. His senses tell him only that something is, but what it is must be learned by his mind.
Scott, listen to me. There are people in the government, in every place. There's always people in the intelligence service and even in the electronic intelligence business. There are people, and certainly in the military, and certainly in the State Department, and certainly in other places, where they take the oath of office. It's not to their boss or the general or the admiral or to the president. It's to the Constitution. And there's so many more of those people than you think. Okay, who will come to, they have to be sure it's going to be okay, but will come and talk. It's full of people, and they were able to, even on that mission. I would guess, I don't know, I don't know any. You can see from the quotes that my friend learned to understand that a lot of the people thought it was a very dumb thing that the president had done, and for more than dumb, and what it is. He has told Western Europe and Germany, our great allies, that if he was so worried that they would not go all out to support him in a war in the Ukraine, which I think he had reason to believe then, and we're talking about late September 26th, he had reason to believe would not go well. It was going to be much tougher than they thought. That great victory, remember when the Russians fell back, they had a unit, frontline unit that wasn't frontline, and it wasn't as powerful as it should be, that collapsed and ran away.
All thinking is a process of identification and integration. Man perceives a blob of color. By integrating the evidence of his sight and his touch, he learns to identify it as a solid object. He learns to identify the object as a table. He learns that the table is made of wood. He learns that the wood consists of cells, that the cells consist of molecules, that the molecules consist of atoms. All through this process, the work of his mind consists of answers to a single question: what is it? His means to establish the truth of his answers is logic, and logic rests on the axiom that existence exists. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. A contradiction cannot exist. An atom is itself, and so is the universe. Neither can contradict its own identity, nor can a part contradict the whole. No concept man forms is valid unless he integrates it without contradiction into the total sum of his knowledge. To arrive at a contradiction is to confess an error in one's thinking. To maintain a contradiction is to abdicate one's mind and to evict oneself from the realm of reality. Reality is that which exists. The unreal does not exist. The unreal is merely that negation of existence which is the content of a human consciousness when it attempts to abandon reason. Truth is the recognition of reality. Reason, man's only means of knowledge, is his only standard of truth. The most depraved sentence you can now utter is to ask, whose reason? The answer is yours. No matter how vast your knowledge or how modest, it is your own mind that has to acquire it. It is only with your own knowledge that you can deal. It is only your own knowledge that you can claim to possess or ask others to consider. Your mind is your only judge of truth, and if others dissent from your verdict, reality is the court of final appeal. Nothing but a man's mind can perform that complex, delicate, crucial process of identification which is thinking. Nothing can direct the process but his own judgment. Nothing can direct his judgment but his moral integrity. You who speak of a moral instinct as if it were some separate endowment opposed to reason. Man's reason is his moral faculty. A process of reason is a process of constant choice in answer to the question, true or false, right or wrong. Is a seed to be planted in soil in order to grow, right or wrong? Is a man's wound to be disinfected in order to save his life, right or wrong? Does the nature of atmospheric electricity permit it to be converted into kinetic power, right or wrong?